Hi, in this video I'm going to show you how to create this animation and some other cool stuff in Adobe After Effects. And not only that, I'm going to show you some very powerful shortcuts to get it all done fast. And all the project file assets are available for download in the description if you want to follow along with me. All right, let's get right into it. All right, before we hop into After Effects, I just want to run through very briefly what it is we're going to be covering in this tutorial. So the main star of today's video is the if-else expression. Now, if you've never used expressions before, don't worry about it. I'm going to show exactly how they're written, exactly how to use them, and a couple examples, including that Big Ben animation towards the end of this video, once we get through how they work. To start though, what is the if-else expression? Well, in principle, it's actually fairly simple. It's like making a decision based on a condition. If something is true, do one thing, otherwise do something else. So for example, if it's raining outside, I'll take an umbrella, otherwise I won't take an umbrella. It's basically that concept, and that can be fully applied in After Effects, in your animations, in any number of ways. We're gonna jump in now and I'll show exactly how it works. Here in the first composition, I have a very basic square shape layer with a simple fill effect on it. And we're gonna use the color of this fill effect to really showcase how the if-else statement works. Let's add it right now. I'm gonna hold down Alt or Option and click the stopwatch right next to color, and it'll open up our expression editor down here in our timeline. Now I've gone ahead and made a couple color variables so we can plug them into our expression and you can visualize a little bit easier how the expression works. I'm not going to run through how color variables are written because that's not the focus of today's tutorial, but having these two variables here will make it a little bit easier to see the structure of the expression. All you need to know is that these two variables are going to be our end results, meaning if we do one thing, the square will turn red. If we do another, it will turn blue. So let's actually write our if-else expression now. Below our variables, I'm going to type if and an open parentheses, and it'll make both the open and close for us. I'm then going to press the right arrow key and press shift left bracket to make a squiggly bracket. When I hit enter or return, you'll see that it auto makes a second squiggly bracket. And on the right side of this squiggly bracket, I'm going to type else. And once again, the same thing, open a squiggly bracket and then hit enter or return, and we'll see that we now have our full structure for the if-else expression. Anything that goes inside this parentheses here will be our condition that drives the output on these two lines here. I'm going to use the scale of our shape layer here as the condition that drives the output color of our square. So to do that, I'm going to open up the transform toggle down here, and clicking in here, we're going to write a variable for scale. So I'm going to type var s is equal to, and with our cursor right here after the equal sign, I'm going to use the in expression pick whip, which is this one right here, and click and drag to the first value on our scale, which is the X value. For this case, that totally works. I'm then going to add a semicolon to end the line so After Effects knows that that's the end of the variable. We can now use this scale variable to see how the different logical conditions in the if-else expression work. I'm going to click in here and start with the equals to condition. So I'm going to type S is equals to with two equal signs, and let's put in a value like 50. And then in here, our results for this one, I'm going to put red, and for this one, I'm going to type blue. So what we're basically saying here is that if the scale is equal to 50%, the color of our square should be red. Otherwise, it should be blue. Now, right now, the scale is 100, which is our otherwise output. So right now it's blue. But if we click this here and type in 50, we can see that when it's set to 50% scale, the color of our square turns to red. And we can see this a little bit easier if we click and drag on our scale. Anything that's not 50 is blue. And then as soon as we cross through 50, you can see it flashes red. As soon as we stop on 50, it's now red. So that's the equals to logical condition. The next one is less than. So I'm going to change the two equal signs here to a less than sign, just like so. And when I click away, it changes to blue. And that's because we're set to 50. We're not less than 50. But if I drag below this, just like so, we can see that it changes to red. So now anything that is less than 50, our square will be red, and anything that is above 50, our square will be blue. The same works with the greater than sign. So I'm going to change the less than here to a greater than sign. And now anything above 50 will be red, like so. So all the way up to here will be red, and then anything below 50 will be blue. Now we can make a slight modification to both of these with an equal sign. So I'm going to add the less than sign again, but add an equal sign after. And when we set this to 50, we can now see that it also includes 50 in our expression. So before, when it's just the less than, it doesn't include 50 because we're saying it's less than 50. But by adding an equal sign, we're saying less than or equals to 50 will be red. And once again, the same is with greater than. So we can do greater than or equal to 50 will be red, otherwise it's blue. So now if it's 50 or greater, it's red. If it's less than 50, it'll be blue. The next logical condition is not equals to, which is just the opposite of our equals to. So to write this, I'm going to delete this and add an exclamation mark right here with an equal sign right after. So anything that is not equals to 50 will be red. And then as soon as it's equal to 50, it'll be blue. It's again, the opposite of our equals to. So if we type in 50 here, we can see that it changes to blue, but anything that is not 50 will be red as defined by our expression here. So those are the logical conditions that you can use, but we can actually take this a step further. You can actually have the expression look at multiple conditions to then define the output. So I'm going to add a variable here right below our S. I'm going to add a var r for rotation. I'm going to type equals to, and then once again, use the in expression pick whip here and drag to our rotation value and let go. And we'll see that it auto fills in transform.rotation. We then want to add that semicolon to end the line and then hit enter to separate it there. So we now have a rotation variable and a scale variable. What we can do is use the and or the or modification to have it look at multiple conditions at the same time. So I'm going to change our scale one just back to equals. So if scale is equals to 50, and then I'm going to put 2 ampersands for and. So we're basically saying if the scale is equal to 50 and another condition, then our outputs will happen. The second condition that we're going to put here is our new rotation variable. So I'm going to type R, and then let's put it equals to 45. So if our scale is equal to 50 and our rotation is equal to 45, then it should be red. But let's actually do that now. Let's change the scale to 50, and then in rotation, I'm going to change it to 45. And you can see as soon as we have both of these values, as soon as both of these values are true, then our square turns red. But as soon as one of these is not what's written in here, then it'll go back to blue. An alternative to this is instead of and, we can set it to or, which will mean that if only one of these conditions is true, then the red output will happen. So for example, we can set this to 50, but our rotation is still 0. As long as one of these is true, then the first value happens. Alternatively, if we set this back to 100 and our rotation to 45, once again, we have our condition met and it is now red. If both of these are not true, then it'll default to the else output, which is in this case, blue. You don't always have to use two different variables to drive the and or statements. You could use the same variable. So in this example, I wrote if the scale is greater than 50 and the scale is less than 100, which basically means the scale is anywhere between 50 and 100, then our output should be red. If it's below 50 or if it's above 100, it'll be our else output, which is blue. So we can see here I have it set to 75 scale. As soon as I start to change this, as long as we're in between our defined 50 and 100, it'll stay red. But if it goes below our 50, it'll go back to blue. And if it goes above our 100, it'll go to blue as well. Now, if we swap these, so the first one change it from greater than to less than, and the second one change it from less than to greater than, well, this condition can never be true. The scale can't be less than 50 and also be greater than 100. That's not possible. But if we change our and in here to an or statement, now if our value is less than 50 or greater than 100, it'll be red, as we can see here. So in between 50 and 100 is now our else output, but below 50 and above 100 is our if output. That is how this expression works. I'm now going to jump into a more practical example. Oh, and don't forget to like the video and subscribe to School of Motion if you want more tutorials like this. Okay, a little bit more of a practical example of using an if-else statement is to put a little bit of control on another expression. So in here, I just have a basic text layer that says Flickr with the font Instrument Serif, which is in the downloads if you want to use this specific font. I'm going to select the layer and hit T for opacity and move forward to about 2 seconds. I'm going to set a keyframe at 100 and then move back to about 1 second and drop this down to 0. So if we play through, we can see that this is just a very basic fade in. What I want to do is have this flicker a little bit as it's fading up. So it kind of has a little bit of randomness, maybe like a light bulb or something that's flickering. Before we add our if-else expression, we're going to use another expression to drive this flicker, and that is the wiggle expression. Now the wiggle expression is very simple. If we hold down Alt or Option and click our stopwatch here, and we type in wiggle like so, and we open parentheses, all we need to do is fill in 2 values. The first value is the frequency, or the amount it wiggles per second. So I'm going to put in something like 100. And the second value is the amount that it actually wiggles. So I'm going to put for this second value, again, 100. And you can mess around with the values. For this case, these are the numbers that I'm going to use. When I click away and hit play, we can see that it's flickering before our keyframe and also after our keyframe. Well, we don't want this. We only want the flicker to happen between our 2 keyframes. To do this, we're going to use the if-else expression to help drive this. So I'm going to turn our wiggle expression into a variable. I'm going to type var flicker is equal to our wiggle expression. And then I'm going to add a semicolon at the end to make sure that After Effects knows that that's the end of our variable. I'm then going to hit enter or return a couple times, and let's write our if-else expression. So let's type if, and our open parentheses, and then our squiggle bracket, else, squiggle bracket, and return. Let's make an opacity variable. We're going to type var and just put O is equal to transform dot opacity, and of course our semicolon. In our parentheses, we can now add the logical condition so that it only flickers between 0 and 100. So to do this, let's do what we did before. I'm going to type O to reference our opacity variable, and I'm going to say that if it's greater than 0, and so using our two ampersands to also say and, our opacity is less than 100. So we're basically saying if it's above 0 and below 100, then we want our output to happen. And our output in this case is the variable flicker that we wrote. So I'm just going to type in flicker here. Now for our else statement, what should we put for this? Well, the basic way to say in an expression for nothing to happen is just to type value. So once again, if it's above 0 and below 100, it will flicker. Otherwise, no flicker will happen. And when we click away and press play, we can see that we now have no flicker before a keyframe and no flicker after. The flicker only ever happens between our keyframes, which is exactly what we want. Finally, if you want a little bit more control on the actual randomness of your flicker, with the wiggle expression, if you add a line before with the seed random, like so, and you put in any number here, so we can say 1, 2, 3, and then we add our semicolon after, we've now changed the actual flicker. So if I play through here, we can see that this is the flicker for 1, 2, 3, but if we change this to something like 1, 1, 1, or any other number, the flicker will now be slightly different. Pause for a second. We're using expressions to help make more dynamic animations. But if you want to make your animations more dynamic across all of your work, I recommend diving into Animation Bootcamp from School of Motion. This course teaches you the art and principles behind great animation and how to apply them in After Effects. It's one of our most popular guided courses for taking your work to the next level. Or if you want to dive deep into expressions, check out our course Expression Session, where you'll learn to write, understand, and use expressions in After Effects to improve your daily workflow. Check it out at schoolofmotion.com. All right, let's get right back into animating that Big Ben title card. Finally, onto our Big Ben animation. Now that we understand the if-else expression as well as the wiggle expression, we can use these in some really cool ways to make a very fun setup with our chained tower like in the original example. What I have here is a blank composition, and I'm gonna hit Control-K or Command-K on Mac to open up the composition settings. I just have it set to 4K at 24 frames per second and 5 seconds. To make a new composition, you can always just click this button and then set up your composition here in this window. I already brought in the files that are available for download with a Big Ben folder right here. This is the original photo taken from photographer Henry B. Now, what I did in the animation is split it up into sections so we can control each of the different pieces of the tower. That takes quite a bit of time of masking, so to save everyone time, I already went ahead and prepped each of the pieces of the tower so you can just drag and drop them in. So let's go ahead and assemble our tower now in our composition. I'm gonna close this out here, and I'm gonna bring in Big Ben 1 through 4 into our comp. I'm then going to select our Big Ben 1 and click and drag and hold down Shift so that it drags perfectly vertical, straight down until it roughly lines up with our other tower piece. I'm then gonna hold down Shift still and click the next one and do the same thing. Click and drag downwards until it lines up with our tower piece here. And then once again with the last piece until we line up just like so. Now everything is off frame, but let's chain these together. And we're gonna use parenting for this. So I'm gonna select the 4 and I'm gonna use the parent pick whip and parent it to 3. I'm then gonna use 3 and parent it to 2 and 2 to 1. We've now made a sort of chain between all the layers. So anything that we control with 1, if we zoom out here, they're now all chained together. If we drag the 1, all of the following ones are controlled as well. So I'm gonna drag this to about here, and then I'm gonna grab the corner right here and hold down Shift so that it scales proportionally until we get our tower roughly in a good position like that. We can always change this later. So we have our tower chain set up here, but we don't actually have the under parts of each of our tower pieces. If you look at the example animation here, you can see I put this sort of like dark brown shape to make it look kind of fake 3D. But if we solo our first piece here, we can see that that's not there. So let's actually add that right now. I'm gonna zoom in and I'm gonna go right here and select the pen tool right up here. I'm then going to add a mask in the rough shape of what it should look like. We're trying to fake a little bit of perspective. Now, when I close the mask, we can see our layer disappears because it's actually masking it out. But if we select our layer and hit M to open up the masks, and we set it to none, then our mask is just on our layer, not controlling any of the visibility, because we don't actually want it to drive the visibility of our layer. So I'm just gonna tweak the corner point until we get it to roughly the right perspective, and then I'm gonna throw on a fill effect. Now, this little pop-up window here is FX Console. It's a free plugin I use all the time, and this is how I'll be pulling up effects. I highly recommend you get it. Once again, it's free, and it just makes searching for effects a lot easier. So with our FX Console pulled up here, I'm gonna type in fill and select our fill option here, and then I'm gonna set it to all masks. So now it's reading our mask here. Then taking the the eyedropper tool, I'm going to click this and click one of the dark spots of our tower. And if we click away, we can now see that we have a sort of underside to the tower. I might want to make this a little bit darker, so I'm just going to open this up and maybe make it just a little bit darker, something like that. Looks pretty good. But we can see that our fill is actually covering some of the details of our tower. So to fix this, all we need to do is add another effect, CC Composite. And when we do this, we can see that the little bits of details that were lost, if I toggle this on and off, those little bits of details are now on top of our fill effect. When we go back to 100% scale, we can now see that we have the under part of our tower. And of course, at any time, we can zoom in and adjust the perspective of this to whatever we like. I'm now going to repeat the steps for Big Ben 3 and Big Ben 2. There we go. I have all three done. Now we don't need to do it on Big Ben 1 because that part is not part of our tower. So we don't need to worry about adding the under part to that specific layer. So if I turn these off one by one, we can see that we have the under part of each tower that gives it kind of a fake 3D look. Let's zoom in here on our top tower piece. What we're aiming to do is have it rotate just like in the example. If I hit R for rotation and I start rotating it, we can see that it doesn't rotate around the right point. It's rotating around the anchor point, which is in the center of the layer. If I undo that and hit Y for the move anchor point tool, and we click and drag our anchor point here down to our bottom corner, just roughly close to here. And then we start rotating, we can see that we're rotating just like in the example on the corner point of our tower piece. But there's a problem that happens when we try and rotate it to the left. When I try and rotate it to the left, the anchor point is still over here. So of course we could move the anchor point here and then rotate it to the left. But the problem is now if we try and rotate to the right, we have that same issue. So we basically need to have the anchor point jump to different locations depending on the rotation. And this is where an if-else statement can work really, really well. If our rotation is greater than 0, we want the anchor point to be over here on the right side corner. And if it's less than 0, we want it to be over here in the left side corner. I'm gonna hit Shift A to open up the anchor point so we can see both the anchor point and the rotation. I'm gonna press Alt or Option and click the stopwatch right next to anchor point to start our expression. We're gonna write our if-else expression in the anchor point and use the rotation as our condition. So let's start with just the variable for our rotation because we know we're gonna use this. I'm gonna type var r is equal to, and then we can use our in expression pick whip and drag it onto our rotation and then hit a semicolon to end the line. Then down 2 lines, I'm gonna type if and our if-else statement expression setup, just like so. And we can put in here the start of our expression. So I'm going to type in here, if rotation is greater than or equal to 0, then we want our anchor point to be this one. Otherwise, we want it to be the other spot. So how do we define the actual anchor point coordinate? This is actually relatively simple. We just need to make 2 variables for each of the coordinates of our anchor point. So I'm going to add right before here 2 variables. I'm going to do var a is equal to and var b is equal to. And we're going to fill this in with 2 simple sets of coordinates. So our var a will be our first variable, the right side corner. And what I'm going to do here is hit space and add a open brackets. And I'm going to just type in the 2 values that we have here with our anchor point set on the right side here. I'm not worried about the decimals because it doesn't need to be that precise, just close enough. So for our first one, we should type 673 and then add a comma and 1513. And then for B, what I'm going to do is move our anchor point, still with the anchor point move tool selected. I'm going to select our anchor point and move it here to the left side and do the same thing this time with the new coordinates. So once again, open the bracket, note our value, which is 105, comma, 1475. And then of course, at the end of both of these, I want to make sure we have a semicolon to end the line. So now we have both of our coordinates set. What I can do now is just plug these in really simply into our if-else statement. If our rotation is equal to or greater than 0, then we want the anchor point to be on the right corner. So I'm going to set it to A. Otherwise, we want it to be on the left corner, which is B. When we click away and zoom out, we can see that the actual tower piece seemed to jump away from its proper position. But when we actually mess with the rotation, we can see that something is happening where the anchor point is jumping. All we need to add to fix this sort of jump is add a very simple expression to the position to kind of counteract that movement. So with our layer selected, I'm going to press Shift P to also open up our position right here. And I'm going to add an expression to this. Holding out Alt or Option, I'm going to press the position stopwatch right here. And I'm going to type in anchor point. We're basically having the position reference the value that is our anchor point. And when I click away, we can see that the layer sort of disappears. Even though it's right here, it's not in the right position. And we can't seem to drag it. If I go back to the mouse tool and try and drag the layer, it doesn't let me drag it. And that's because we just need to add a simple extra bit to this expression. So after anchor point, I'm just going to add a plus value, just like so. And once again, our layer seems to move a little bit, but now we can actually move it where we want it to go. So I'm going to zoom back in here and I'm going to place it roughly where it goes, like that on the top of our tower. Now, when we mess with the rotation, if we crank it up above 0, we can see that it rotates to the right on the right corner. But if we drag it to the left, we can see that the anchor point moves and the position counteracts that movement, and we're now rotating based on the left corner. So we now have our perfect setup without any keyframes that is completely procedurally driven by our if-else expression and that position expression that we added. With that set on the top tower piece, we can now go ahead and use the exact same system on the other tower pieces to build out our chain. I just finished setting all of them up. So we can see here, if I solo this layer and I hit rotation, we can see that now rotates based on this corner. And if we go to the left, the anchor point jumps. And then the same thing over here with rotation, goes over here to the right and on the left. But something that's really, really cool, and the reason we chain them together, is that if we select all of our layers and hit R for rotation, and then click and drag to the right, we can see that they add the rotation from the previous layer. So we get sort of this like opened chain look from both the left and the right. What we can do to make this a little bit easier to control is if we right click and make a new null object, and we name this null object just by hitting enter or return on the layer, we're going to name this master control, like so. I'm going to add a slider control effect on here. And this basically is just an empty effect that lets us tie any other attribute to this number and control it a lot easier. With the master control selected, I'm going to click and drag this pick whip right here all the way up to our slider control, just like that. And then I'm going to right click the rotation and click copy expression only, and then select the other layers and hit Control or Command V to paste, and it'll auto paste that same expression onto the rest of them. So now basically what that did is we can control the rotation of all 4 of the layers with just a very simple slider control right here. Instead of having to keyframe all of them, if we want to keyframe our rotation, we just come to our master control and change our slider control's value. We can also, of course, rename the slider control to rotation so we know what it controls. All right, the hard part is done. We can now finally start adding some of the fun animation to this whole setup. The first thing I'm going to do is have the tower fly in from the bottom. I'm going to select the bottom piece right here and press P for position. And I'm going to set a keyframe position right here. And let's drag this forward just a little bit like that. Let's then drag this down until it's completely off screen. We want our entire tower to be off screen for the start of this animation. So now we see if we scrub through our timeline, we can see that the tower slides up. Let's adjust the keyframe a little bit so it goes a little bit faster. If we play, we can see that it comes in fully linear. It's a bit abrupt to have it just kind of come in like this. So what we can do is add a little bit of momentum transfer to the other pieces. Right here at the end of our position animation from the first piece, I'm going to select the other 3 layers and hit P for position. I'm then going to click one of the keyframes and it'll automatically make a keyframe for all of the layers. I'm then going to move forward a little bit, maybe like a second or so, and add another keyframe, pressing this button here. And we can see that with all our layers selected, it automatically makes a keyframe like that. I'm going to go to the middle now of these keyframes and click and drag one of the Y value positions to the left. And you can see that they proportionally all move together. The value doesn't really matter, it's just up to you. So I'm going to go with something like that. And now when we press play, it has this really kind of clunky linear animation. So let's fix that with some easing. I'm going to select all our keyframes here and right click, keyframe assistant, easy ease, or the shortcut is just F9. Then with these selected, I'm going to go to the graph editor with this button here and make sure I'm on the speed graph. So clicking this drop down button here, make sure edit speed graph is selected. Let's then click and drag our first keyframes and move it to the left so that it starts really fast, and then click and drag our middle one and ease it out. And do the same thing over here. Let's start it eased and have it ease out. So this is a really good starting point. If we press play, we can see we have a little bit more eased and it has a little bit more character. This needs some tweaking. So I'm just going to do a little bit of messing around of moving the keyframes maybe left, changing the easing a little bit, kind of adjusting these a little bit until it gets to something I like. This part just takes a little bit of trial and error. Okay, after some tweaking of the values, this is what I ended up with. And when we press play, we can see we get this nice sort of momentum transfer to the top pieces, and then they drop and settle. All right, let's actually animate that rotation that we set up before. So I'm going to select the master control and move the playhead to somewhere like right here, right when the position ends. I'm going to add a keyframe on that slider control that we made before and move forward a little bit and just increase the value to maybe something like that. Looks pretty good. Let's then hit U on our keyboard to open up the keyframes here and move a little bit more. And let's do the opposite direction. Let's push it over to the left. And then once again, let's move forward a little bit and then set it back to 0. So we have sort of this rotating to the right, to the left, and then back. And just like before, I'm going to select all of them and hit F9 to easy ease, and then just start messing around with the actual easing of this until we get something that we like. So I think I like this. What I did is have it start slow and ease in and ease out. So we get a nice snappy motion pushing over to the right. Same thing moving to the left. kind of get that nice ease in, ease out look. And then the same thing for the end right here. But if I press play, we can see that it's a little bit slow. It's a bit slow for my taste. So what I'm going to do is exit the graph editor and select all these keyframes, and then hold down Alt or Option on the keyboard and click and drag the last keyframe over to the left. And this will just proportionally scale our keyframes so that we can make it a little bit faster. So let's test out this. Let's see what that looks like. That's a bit fast now, so I'm going to actually make it a little bit slower and just tweak it until I find something that I like. And I think that's pretty good. Now, something I noticed when I play through here is that the bottom piece here is rotating around the center. We never actually moved the anchor point for this. So a really easy fix for this is just to go to our second position keyframe, make sure the playhead is over it, and then with our Move Anchor Point tool, pressing Y on the keyboard, we can just click and drag this down to the bottom of our layer. And when I press play, we can now see that it rotates around the bottom of that. So that was something I forgot to do before, but a really easy fix for something like that. Okay, let's go over to our flicker composition and select our flicker layer and copy it and go over to our main Big Ben composition and paste it here. And let's drag this below our Big Ben. Let's also change the text. So I'm just going to double click the layer and type in Big Ben. Now the text is a little bit covered, so I'm just going to go between where the space is and just add a few more spaces just like so. And that'll just help space it out. We can also click and drag and move it a little bit, maybe to the right until it feels about centered. That looks good to me. Let's then bring in a couple textures. Now these textures are again provided in the project files. I'm gonna bring in this paper texture here at the bottom, and we can scale this down. This is a really big paper texture. I'm gonna scale this down so we get the texture a little bit smaller like that. Let's also change our Big Ben text here. I'm going to change the color over here in the character panel. Now, if you don't see the character panel, you can go up to Window and select Character, and it should show up. And with the layer selected, clicking this color box right here, I'm going to change it to a nice blue like this, somewhere around here. Looks good. And we can even change the blending mode from normal to something like multiply to get a little bit of that texture to pass through our layer, just like so. So this is normal, and this is with multiply. So now when we press play, we can see that we have the tower come in and our Big Ben flickering in right there. But I want the flicker to happen after our Big Ben has kind of settled. So I'm gonna hit U with no layer selected to open all of our keyframes. And then I'm gonna click and drag the two flicker opacity keyframes and move them forward to near the end of the rotation. Somewhere like here should be good. And let's also make it a little bit faster by bringing in the right one. When we press play, we now have this animation with the flicker in. I think another great detail to add here is to have the two words flicker in slightly offset from each other. So I'm gonna duplicate with Control D or Command D on Mac, and I'm gonna select the rectangle tool up here at the top. Now, if you don't see the rectangle, just click and hold this and select the rectangle tool. With this selected on one of our layers, I'm gonna select Big, just like that. And then on the other layer, I'm just gonna click and drag and select Ben. And so now we have our words easily separated. Then on the Ben layer, I'm gonna select the opacity keyframes and just scoot it forward a couple frames like so. So now when we play, we get a slightly offset flicker on Big and Ben. And it kind of adds a little bit more dimension to our text layers. Let's add in our overlay texture as well. So this is also provided in the project file. I'm gonna click and drag this here on top and set this to overlay. And when we press play, we can see that we have a little bit of an overlay texture on our actual Big Ben, but it's not really showing up too much on the background. So what I'm going to do is make a duplicate of this. So hitting Control or Command D and then changing it from overlay to linear light. This is a much too strong version of this. So I'm just going to hit T for opacity and drop this down to something like maybe 15%. So we can see that we have a little bit of nice texture movement around the edges, as well as that nice texture on top of all of our assets here. All right, next, let's add a vignette. So I'm gonna right click in here and make a new solid and make sure it is a fully white solid, just like so. Click OK. And I'm gonna add on the CC vignette effect, just like so. Now, a great way to control this is if you add on a levels effect after this as well. And we can kind of tweak these sort of controls on our vignette, as well as the actual scale of our layer. So if we grab one of the corner scale points here, we can change it to be a little bit taller, or we can do a little bit wider, flatter like this. So I think something like this is good, and maybe tweak the levels a little bit like this, so we get a little bit more control on the actual look of the vignette. Then changing the blending mode on this layer to multiply, we can see that we have this nice vignette kind of shaping our composition. So without it, we have this. With the vignette, we have this. For our final layer, we're gonna add an adjustment layer to add just a little bit of extra motion to our composition. So I'm gonna right click right here, make a new adjustment layer, and I'm gonna rename this to Final Effects, just so we know what it is. I'm gonna bring on here a transform effect, and I'm gonna duplicate it. So we have two transform effects. The first one, we're gonna start with a nice fast and eased out scale. On our first transform effect here, I'm gonna keyframe the scale. And then I'm gonna move forward to about maybe 2.5 seconds and just increase this to something a little bit larger, like 130 should be good. Let's select both of these keyframes hit F9 to easy ease, and go to our graph editor. And then I'm going to select the first point and move this to the left and have it ease out. So what this will do is have it start really, really fast. We can see the velocity is really fast, and it'll lose its velocity over time in a nice eased motion. When I leave the graph editor and press play, we can see we have that happening with our animation. The second transform is to add a little bit of ambient scale throughout the whole thing. So again on the scale, but on the second transform effect, I'm going to select the scale keyframe button right here and move to the end of the composition and just increase it to something like 110. And when we press play, we can see we have this sort of ambient scale happening at the same time. To add a little bit of extra camera movement to our composition, I'm going to use a wiggle expression on the first transform's position effect. So on our transform here, on the first one, I'm going to hold down Alt or Option and press the keyframe button next to position. It'll open up our expression editor, and this time we're just doing a really simple wiggle expression. So I'm going to type wiggle with a value of 2 and 7. I like those values for this, but feel free to mess around with it and use whatever values you like. Now when we press play, we can see we have a little bit of an extra camera movement that goes left to right. Finally, to add a little bit more sauce to this animation and make it a little bit choppier, we're going to add a posterized time effect. So I'm going to bring up the FX console and type in posterized time and set this value from 24 down to 12. And now when we press play, we get this cool kind of like stop motion-y, almost more jittery, choppy animation, which I think just kind of ties it all together. I think it really sells that final look. And of course, remember that if you don't like the flicker of the text here, maybe with the posterized time, the flicker doesn't look quite right to you, you can go into your Big Bend layer, into your opacity here, and change the seed random to whatever you want. So let's change this to something like 1, 2, 3, 4. And now the flicker is a little bit different on this. Again, feel free to mess around with it however you like. And with all of that done, we have our final animation here built on the foundations of the if-else expression. Pretty cool. That's all for this video. Thanks for watching, and remember you can download all the files from the project in the description. Make sure to like and subscribe for more School of Motion tutorials, and if you're interested in taking your animations to the next level, don't forget to check out Animation Bootcamp on the School of Motion website. See ya.